Today I'm joined by Nick Searl, a partner of both Argent and Argent Related. Now, Nick, you've worked on delivering King's Cross, and you now lead the 10 million square foot Brent Cross South development. So perhaps today we can talk both about the past and look to the future. Now, about King's Cross, I mean, one of the great successes of that master plan was its flexibility, that it could change to adapt to the economic circumstances at any one time. So as we enter a very difficult and indeed uncertain period, what lessons did you learn then that might be applicable now?
You're absolutely right. I think one of the great successes of King's Cross was indeed, particularly the way its planning permission was constructed that allowed it to evolve. When you're taking on projects that are going to take 15 to 20 years to deliver, the one racing certainty is that the context into which you're going to deliver them, whether it be environmental, social, economic, is all going to change probably several times over that period. So King's Cross was allowed to evolve, and that is in a physical sense. I think there is also a question of the flexibility that was built in from us kind of in a technical sense, particularly when you look at digital infrastructure. Questions that were being asked in 2006 of, what should we be allowing for, were obviously asked in the context of a world where, Facebook was in its infancy and we didn't have a mobile phone at that time. So I think things changed very quickly. And of course, we're now in a situation where we're looking at a new town centre project up in Brent Cross, and it's bigger. It's probably going to take a little bit longer, I would say, to deliver. And we're delivering it now. Here we are at the outset, just as King's Cross was born into the great, the financial crisis, and that's when it started. Brent Cross is being born into this new and somewhat different crisis. But both require that ability to evolve and adapt as you go along. We're not going to be able to define what this whole place will be at the outset. It would be crazy to even try. And the more that we can be ready for some things that we're starting to imagine, and I do mean imagine at the moment, because I think more than ever, we genuinely don't know how certain things are going to look in 2 years' time, let alone 10. So we're starting to imagine what some of those look like, but we need to be ready to respond to the unexpected as well, because that is undoubtedly going to occur.
Yes, well, I suppose you're in a very good position of actually being able to plan now in the next few years, be able to see what some of the impacts of COVID-19 will be on the way that we organise ourselves. And I think that there's been a lot of talk about how we need more green spaces in the city, since the lack of it in some areas has been highlighted by the current situation. So do you think that might mean there's going to be a bit of a shift away from the centre to outer London, to, let's say, the leafier suburbs as a result of COVID-19? That might be indeed an advantage for Brent Cross.
I think you might be right. None of us can know the answer to these things for sure. I mean, just anecdotally, I'm hearing, estate agents in Brighton and Hove talking about an uptick in inquiries from people in London who are kind of saying, I really want to get out of the city. There is certainly a move, I think, or a dialogue starting up around some dispersal from corporate business perspective to locations around the edges of cities, and that's not just here in London, but potentially across the world. I think you might see that. And part of that is practical planning from their perspective. But I think there's also, from a corporate business perspective, I think businesses are going to be thinking about how far do their people need to travel. I think more than ever, and this comes into the world of sort of the acceleration of thinking that was already going on. There's been for several years now a huge focus on health and well-being, certainly in terms of the language that people are using for staff and the facilities and amenities for staff. I think there is a strong argument that will accelerate, and that could involve actually being in different places as well as just kind of adding more facilities and amenities into existing buildings. So I think there's going to be a combination. And also, we have to think about this in two different ways. There is the immediacy of what businesses in particular are having to respond to right now. And everybody is putting in plans that are going to involve a different way of operating. And the question that we are asking ourselves, and many are asking, is how many of those things are going to flow into long-term change? Some will, some won't, and we are going to struggle, I think, until we start to see these playing out to know exactly which ones they are. But we've started to carry out an exercise now where we are looking through the lens of all of our customers, whether that be office, residential, leisure, and retail, and asking ourselves what are the changes that we are seeing actually starting to happen right now in response to this? Which ones do we think are actually still going to be there in 3 to 5 years' time? And what physical changes in the ways that we do things should we be adopting as a kind of, well, I'll use the word permanent, but what I mean is a medium to long-term solution to the way that we're going about thinking about these things. So I think there's just an enormous amount that's going to play out over the next 12 to 24 months. The advantage that we do have is, one, when you're building these very, very large developments, you have the ability to influence everything. So you can put the various pieces of the jigsaw together. And that is very complex and quite difficult, but also is a real advantage over just when you're, individual organizations putting different buildings along the street. And we also, at Brent Cross, we are blessed with 50 acres of existing green open space, which I think is going to be really, really important to the people that we want to attract to be there for whatever reason. It's going to be a major part of what we will focus on, and I suspect what they will focus on.
Talking about your customers, food and retail are central both to King's Cross and to Brent Cross. And these sectors are being hit really hard, perhaps more heavily than any other sector. How do you see the future shape of shopping in the context of your master plan?
The sadness is that many good businesses are probably going to go out of business. At the same time, a lot of ideas that might have taken years to come to the fore, or maybe may never have got to actually to real gestation and coming into existence, may actually now do so on that basis that things are going to accelerate. And I think the ones that are going to come forward are going to be the innovators. They're going to be the people who are seeing the opportunities that come out of this. When we think about Brent Cross now, and we think about a high street, and we think about food, we think about it in several different ways. But all of the different ways we look at it, we kind of come around and through these different lenses, but we end up thinking locally. If we can reduce the amount of travel, the amount of delivery times, that's going to be a good thing for if the supply chains are local to these places. That from an environmental perspective, that's going to be a good thing. But also, it's going to have just more resonance and more relevance to the places where you are. And, North London, I'm not a North Londoner. I spent most of my time in South London and South, but it's a very unique community in North London. And I think there is a huge opportunity for us to play into the local cultures, the local ways of socializing, but by focusing on specifically what the needs of those communities are. And I'm not just talking about immediately around that place. I'm talking about broadly across that sort of 5-mile radius across North and West London. So I think playing to a local audience seems to me that's going to be the driving force behind how we approach it. I think we're also going to take a view that it's going to be a combination of food, service, and locally focused retailing that is going to make up our high streets. And by service, I mean everything from beauty and hair salons. It's, what can't you buy on the internet? And those kinds of things, right the way through to small scale workspace on the high street, and a focus perhaps more on workspaces on the high street that have good coffee rather than coffee shops on the high street where you can kind of pitch and try to work. I think that's a really interesting point, actually, about some of the makeup of our ground floor of our buildings and high street type spaces, in that I think the whole work from home thing is going to, some of that is going to play out in the future. I think for a lot of people, actually physically working at home is not always possible or easy. So what we actually mean by work from home perhaps is work near to home, avoid the commute, be able to go somewhere that's 5 minutes away, do what you need to do in a community of people who are like-minded and doing that as well, and then be able to get home very quickly at the end of your work period or day or whatever it is. So I think we're going to see things like that appearing alongside more traditional F&B. And I think, food still has a massive part to play. The lesson at King's Cross was that, you've got 80 different cultures within a 1 mile radius, and food ties everybody together. And it's been a huge bringing together of people. And it's been a huge focus for visitors to come to us at King's Cross. And that's going to be a similarly large part of how we think about Brent Cross. Again, this isn't like it's not new. I mean, we were talking about this before COVID. It's not new, but I do think it's going to place a far greater emphasis on that.
You're a keen cyclist, and you're also chairman of Club Peloton, that's raised some several million, £3 to £4 million for charities over the last decade or so. So, do you think the temporary road alterations for bikes and pedestrian that we're seeing in London now as a part of the Mayor's Street Pace programme, do they herald a new and improved future for our streets?
Well, firstly, before I answer that question, let's just remind your audience that you were the founder of what became Club Peloton as well. You were the first person to dream it up and to get a gang of people riding down there. And, I think everybody who's subsequently been involved is very grateful to the pebble that you pushed that has turned into a bit of a boulder. I think we are going to see some fundamental change. And what is fantastic is actually seeing people right at the heart of government actually prepared to stand up and talk about what has always been a bit of a hot potato. And now the green light is there to support it. And I think that clearing away some of the politics of this is so crucial to being able to see the next wave. I mean, we are talking about the temporary closure of certain roads within central London. Just by way of example, King's Boulevard at King's Cross was designed to be a taxi and bus route that passed from the stations up through to Granary Square, and the buses went through Granary Square. We put King's Boulevard in there with a temporary pedestrian use while we built all the buildings around it, with the idea that we would come back and then put in the taxis and the buses at a later date. And of course, everybody has now spent 6-7 years experiencing a pedestrianised route and what the good and the bad and all the rest of it that are. Similarly, Granary Square has experienced what it's like to have that before buses and taxis turned up through it. The reality is that both are going to end up without the taxis and buses passing through them, because the local council, local people and us all looked at it and said, this is better, this is a better way. We thought we needed the traffic. We thought we needed that to make the shops work, to make the traffic systems work. In reality, we don't. And so the great opportunity here is the fact that we are going to put in these new ways, these new opportunities, albeit on a temporary basis perhaps, but everybody's going to be able to get to experience what the benefits are of that. And it's only when people see it and realise that much of the, frankly, scaremongering that can sometimes go on doesn't necessarily play out that way. And there are ways around these things. And instead of it just being a kind of academic debate, we can actually see the reality of what happens. And 9 times out of 10, when you do that and a problem comes up, you find a way to solve the problem rather than just saying, oh, let's abandon it all. So I am very hopeful that we're going to see some permanent change that comes out of this. I mean, it's not just in London, similar conversations are happening in Manchester, they're happening in Birmingham. And I think we're going to see, I think we will see some permanent change, and I think it will be good. The other thing I will just say to all the cyclists out there is that you have to play your part in this and not kind of take advantage of it. I still think, that the greatest, danger that I feel on a day-to-day basis when I'm riding around in central London is actually other cyclists, and the behaviour of some other cyclists. And I think it really is incumbent upon the cycling community to play their role in demonstrating that this is a way that we can kind of coexist with pedestrians and all the other modes of transport that we want to put into place. And it's not a green light to kind of try and take over the city, because that will actually, I think, end up having a negative impact, and could actually drive things back the other way. So yeah, if we all play our part properly in this, I think we can, I think we're going to see some really great change, and it'll be wonderful to be able to walk down some of the smaller streets, perhaps in the West End, without cars sort of on the pavement and things as they try to squeeze past you.
Good. Well, let's hope COVID-19 does have some positive influence, and thank you for joining me today.
It's a pleasure, Peter. It's nice to see you. Take care.